like to begin with an excerpt from my journal, 1984. I became acquainted with my friend Joe when he was 13 years old, attending a junior high school with 1,100 students in it. He was the son of a single working mother, and they lived in a small home in the old part of town. The hair of his head was bleach blonde and was the crown of his very fair-skinned, thin, 60-inch body. He had a prominent nose, and his eyes were dark and radiant. He got into trouble at school and was required to complete several hours of custodial work as payment for minor damage that he had caused the school property. His grades were well below average, and what little notoriety he experienced was mostly negative. He was known by few. Well, one afternoon, I was working after school. All of the students had left. Joe walked into the office with his vacuum and was vacuuming the front carpet by the counter. And I was in a pile of work that needed to be done before I could go home. He turned the vacuum off, walked into my office, and he said, "Mr. Brewer, I have something I want to share with you." I looked up at him, and he broke my my workaholic gaze. And I said, "Wow, Joe." I said, "I've got a ton of work to do tonight. Maybe we could do this tomorrow and take a walk with each other and just talk?" He said, "No, Mr. Brewer." He said, "You need to come with me now." "All right, Joe, let's make this quick. Wherever you're going," he said, "I know you've got the keys to all the classrooms in this school." And he said, "And I want you to follow me." 13 years old. I got up and I followed him out to the office, and we went down the hall and around the corner, and he walked straight to the choir room. And I thought, wow, what's he going to do in here? So I unlocked the door for him. We walk in. I'm standing there looking at him like, what are you going to do? And he goes over to the grand piano and he removes the quilt. Steinway, grand. I mean, this is a big, beautiful, just brand new, but only a year or two old. Raises the lid on it with that stick, and he uncovers the keyboard and he sits down. There's no music. And I thought, wow, is he going to humiliate himself or just humor me? From my journal. Joe took a deep breath, placed his hands on the great keyboard. It was then I noticed his extraordinarily long, bony fingers for the first time. There was no sheet music to be seen. He bowed his head and began to play Chopin's Polonaise. He played with a depth of feeling unfamiliar to me in that noisy, jostling, crowded assembly of students that came every day. He played on and on until my emotional dam cracked and tears poured down my cheeks. When he finished, I sat in stunned silence. What began for me as a mild annoyance had been transformed into a spiritual, emotional awakening. Well, Joe lovingly covered up the piano, put the lid down, covered the keyboard, didn't say anything. I got up and we walked out that door. And as we went down the hall to the office, I said, "Joe, I want to thank you for giving me one of the greatest concerts I have ever listened to." And he went about his work and finished vacuuming, and I finished my work and went home late that night. A few weeks later, the Honor Society teacher, advisor, she came to me and she said, "We're preparing a program for the students in our school." She said, "We've got a lot of students who have performed at an extremely high level, and we're going to invite one of the legislators that lives in this area to come in and speak to the students. We need a special musical number. Have you got any ideas?" And I said, "I know of someone who could possibly perform for that program. He said, let me arrange that while you work on the speaker. So she went about her work, and next day I called Joe into my office. And I said, Joe, you remember when you asked me for a favor and I went down and opened that door? I said, now I'm going to ask you for a favor. I said, I'd like you to perform for the Honor Society. And he just, his head dropped. I said, oh, wow, Mr. Brewer, I've never played before anyone. I can't do that. And I looked at him with all the resolve that I could muster. And I said, Joe, I heard you play. I know you can do that. And I said, I want you to ponder this. Without saying no, I would like to meet your mother. I'm going to come to your home one night after school and talk to her about this invitation with you. He said, okay. And he went out the door. I called his mother on the phone. She worked in Salt Lake City, single mom. She arranged to meet me at their home. I went down to their home that evening, and it was a little house that sat back in the trees with some patchy grass around it. The screen door was kind of hanging off the hinges. I knocked, she opened the door and very politely invited me in, and all I could see was a few pieces of well-used furniture, but I could not see a piano. And I said to his mother, I've invited your son to play for the Honor Society. Oh my, Mr. Brewer, he's never done anything like that. But if he said he can do it, then I'll support him. And I said, could I just ask you one question? Where's the piano? She said, well, we don't have a piano. I said, well, what does Joe play on? And she says, well, his uncle gave him a keyboard a few months ago. And she said, Joe, bring out the keyboard. And the keyboard was just a little keyboard. And he comes home, she said, every night, and he just practices on it. He listens to the music. I said, well, who's his piano teacher? And she said, oh, he's never had lessons. And I said, well, and she said, he doesn't know how to read music. He just listens and plays. Oh, okay, well, I would like to make an arrangement for you to come with your son to the Honor Society and sit on the front row and right in front of behind the piano. I'm going to turn the piano toward the stage facing me, and you and Joe will be center in front, and everyone will be behind you. And Joe, you won't see a soul. You'll just see that piano when you walk in. And all you have to do is pretend that there's nobody behind you. They agreed to come. I quote from my journal. On the appointed night, they appeared at the auditorium door. To the astonishment of some students and parents, I escorted the mother and son to their appointed seats on the front row near the piano. The gymnasium was filled nearly to capacity with high achievers and their parents. Capacity was 300 people. As awards were given, I could detect some uneasiness with the presence of Joe and his mother. His reputation preceded him, and several of the students had the "why is he here" look on their face. Following the awards, I fixed my gaze on Joe and his mother, and Joe was as white as a sheet. Students and parents, I said, it is my honor to introduce to you Joe Open, who will now play Chopin's Polonaise. Shock seemed to ripple around the room. Joe stood and slowly walked to the piano. He slid onto that bench, and with one big heaving sigh, he just stared at the keys. He nervously placed those long fingers on that piano keyboard, and he began to play. There was a collective holding of breath as his fingers began to glide effortlessly across that keyboard. Joe was becoming lost in the world that he had created for himself, and the audience was being transported there unwillingly at first, and then with full consent. His music ended with a flurry of delicate touches on the keys. The parents roared to their feet. The students, seeing what their parents felt, roared to their feet, and they gave him a standing ovation that was worthy of his performance. And on that day, Joe took his place in the sun. And on that day, a lot of people walked out of that auditorium considering the worth of a soul. Thank you.